Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pine Hills Church Podcast. So grateful you are with us as we continue our series on practicing the way. This is the second week in our conversation. So if you missed last week, be sure you go back and check that out. And as always, we want to be very clear that we're building upon the work of John Mark Comer and his Practicing the Way book and the Practicing the Way organization that is just giving amazing just resources for apprenticeship so we can all learn to become more like Jesus. And so if you find value in the conversations that we're having, some of the resources that we're using, be sure you go to practicingtheway.org and just make a donation. Just say thank you for all the great work that they're doing there, or to pick up one of the books, and to make sure that you spread that around, give that to someone else, and continue to help other people grow as well. But in this conversation, we're talking about what does it look like to be formed spiritually as we continue that conversation. And as I was thinking about today's conversation, I really began to think about one of the books that I've been reading my daughters, especially a little bit earlier. They're starting to get into different books, but the book is The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. And maybe you read that book when you were a kid. Maybe you've been reading it to your kids. Maybe there's a place of nostalgia for you with that. But I think we all kind of know what that is. If not, YouTube, the reading of the book, and catch up on it. But it's this concept of this caterpillar that just wakes up one day and it just starts gorging and eating on everything, which sounds like a really great day if I'm going to be honest. And over time, it gets so filled up and so fat that it cocoons itself, and there's this process of transformation that happens, this metamorphosis that happens. And what happens is eventually as that thing changes, it begins to break out of the cocoon. And when it comes out, it's this beautiful and amazing butterfly. And I think that's an interesting concept for us because we're all consuming different things, ideologies, stories, ways of being in the world, things that we think are going to make us happy, all of that stuff. And it's forming and it's shaping us. But sometimes that's transforming us into the wrong thing and not the right thing. Maybe we don't come out as a beautiful butterfly. Maybe we come out as something entirely different. And so if we take our spiritual formation seriously, we can say, hey, this stuff is actually not transforming me into the right thing. And so I need to take Jesus up on his offer when he intersects our story, to be renewed and to change and to be transformed by the power of his Spirit, to be formed into the right thing so I can live a very beautiful and amazing life. And so with that, like as we think about that conversation, keep that concept, that picture in mind, because remember, spiritual formation, as we learned last week, isn't something that we opt into. It is something that is happening to us whether we are aware of it or not. And to be followers of Jesus is to say, man, Jesus lived the best life. He showed us what it was like to be connected with God, what God is like, and how to live empowered by God to show up in our world in really profound and beautiful ways. And to learn from Jesus, be an apprentice of Jesus, is to daily make space to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and then to do the things that Jesus would have us to do. And so with that, let's read 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. It says, do not love this world nor the things it offers you. For when you love the world, you do not have the love of the Father in you. For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, a craving for everything we see, pride in our achievements and possessions. These are not from the Father, but are from this world. And this world is fading away along with everything that people crave. But anyone who does what pleases God will live forever. This verse speaks right to our culture because we have a society that's built on the going after the cravings of physical pleasure. We're chasing feelings. We think something is going to make us happier. It gives us instant gratification. And so we fill our life and our day with all of those things, not realizing that oftentimes chasing immediate gratification is forming us to become people who aren't loving and peaceful presences in our world. Or maybe we're driven towards all the things we can see. And so we want what we can see in this life. We don't want to think about the deep questions of life, what we can't see, what's hard to wrap our brains around. We want just what we can see, what's right in front of us, what's in our immediate day. Or maybe we go after all of the achievements, the things to build our resumes. Or maybe we go after things that just accumulate stuff, whether it's cars or house or clothes or whatever else that we think we can purchase to make us have that hit of dopamine just to make us a little bit more happy. Or maybe it's curating our Instagram feed to make sure that we're showing everyone else this life that we want to project, that we've got it all figured out, that we're happy, that we've got all of this stuff. And man, that to center our lives around that type of stuff is to be formed around things that do not have the capacity to help us to become people of love who are fulfilled and peaceful. But those who reject that faulty way of living actually get to build their lives around God. And when they do that, they get to live forever, which is that Greek word again, that meno, abide, to make your home in. Meaning as you reject the false ways of living in the world and you center your life around God, he makes his home in you and you get to make your home in him, which is a beautiful thing. And remember that we all have some former way of living buried deep within us, and we react out of that. It's formed beliefs. We've made a lot of decisions based upon those things, and to allow God to intersect our story and to begin to transform into changes a bit by bit over a lifetime means we've got to unlearn some of that stuff and relearn better things. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. It says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. By copying and conform is to be molded in accordance with a particular pattern set of standards. Our world is attempting to do this. A lot of times we think that this is just a religious thing. No, our world is trying to make us fit a particular mold, a pattern. And when we reject that, it actually tries to force us into it, which isn't healthy or good. And it should send a lot of red flags up about, man, is that a healthy way to live if everyone's trying to force me in that particular way? And we don't want to conform to the pattern and behavior of the world oftentimes because we buy into that same lie that was given in Genesis chapter 3 to the early couple, that God somehow is trying to hold back on us. And so we want to go after the instant gratification. We want to go after the things in the world. We don't want to be patterned after the ways of God because we somehow think that, man, God isn't good, that he is holding us back from becoming who we should become and going after all of these things. But when we realize that God ultimately loves us, and when he says no, it's for our health and our good, that we get to build our life trusting in him. It's better than what's offered us in this world. And when that happens, we don't conform to the way of the world. We get to be transformed into who Jesus and God wants us to become. And that transformed and conformed, it's written in the present passive tense in the Greek, meaning that it's actively happening to you right now. And a lot of times it's passively happening. There's all these forces that are around us that is forming us into becoming a particular person, having a particular shape in our world. And to make space to be with God, here's a beautiful part of the gospel, is that we don't have to force it to happen. We want to change. We all have stuff in our life we want to change. We start every January with all these resolutions to help us to change and become these particular people, and we've got to force it to happen in the ways of the world. But the way of God says you don't have to white knuckle your way into it. You get to just simply make space to be with God. And over time, he helps you by his power to change the things you need to change, to walk into a new way of being. And then there's a beautiful reality. Like, we have to walk in his power. We don't have to walk in our own power. Because I'm sure you felt the frustration of just not being able to do it in your own power. And that's a hard place to be when you experience that. But when we come to God, we get to realize we get to free ourselves from that. Just get to simply walk in to his way of being by his power. And so every day it's that be with Jesus, become more like him, and then to do the things that he would have us to do as he changes our essential form or nature for the good. That butterfly effect, as we put in all of these inputs from God, these practices from Jesus that help us to live into his way of being, we get to slowly be transformed into something that's actually beautiful and good. And we need to reject the ways of filling our life, consuming things that are leading us away from that. And so if we're all shaped by all the things that we fill our lives with, the things that we most consumed, I just want you to ask and to think about for a second, what are you filling your life with? And who is that leading you to become? Ephesians 4:21-24, it says this, since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature, your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and your attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. And this happens, throwing off the old nature, when we begin to change the way we think. Remember, repentance is to change the way we think, to put on God's way of doing things, to allow his story to repattern our way of being, to reject these old stories saying, I'm not going to buy into that, I don't want to live to that, and putting more and more of God's story through his scriptures, of living it in community, making sure that's repatterning us and is getting into our bodies through our habits and practices with other people in community over time. And so to reject the old way of doing life means we need to start to be more aware of what has shaped us to become the people that we are today. And we need to allow God to empower us to live different lives, to be intentional about our spiritual formation. And so today, the rest of the conversation is going to be this unintentional web of things that form us spiritually. And next week, we're going to look at what does it look like to be intentionally formed spiritually. And so the unintentional spiritual formation through a few different things. The first one are habits, relationships, stories, environment. Remember, a lot of that happens passively. It's been handed to us. And often, sometimes it happens actively. We start to choose some of those things, but it happens over time and through our experiences. And so let's go through these just to give you a little bit of context as we invite you into this, but we have a practice to help you to think a little bit more deeply about that. But the first one is habits, these things that we fill our lives with. We devote our time and our attention every day to these things, and they're silently shaping who you're becoming. These things that you do when you first wake up and the last things you do before you go to bed. It's the things that you devote your time, attention, your money to. It's the things that you turn to when you feel stressed or anxious or worried. And then there's relationships, from your family of origin to the family that you live every day with in your house, to friends, the people you surround yourself with, to your work. A lot of us show up to particular work environments, and that has a formative effect on us, to our wider community, the people that we're allowing to be in our life, that we're spending time with, that we're engaging with, even the people in our city, and even the people online as we're just engaging different philosophies and ways of being. And then there's stories. We're all creatures of stories. When I watch a movie and turn it on with my daughters, I could just count. It doesn't take long before they find a character in that story that they want to embody, and they begin to fight over it. I want to be this. No, I want to be that. And I'm thinking, like, what in the world? Like, why can't we just both be that? We're just pretending anyway. But what's happening is that they long to embody the story. And you might be thinking, oh, that's childish, like we put that away eventually as adults, but I would argue that many of us embody all kinds of different stories. We're just not often conscious that we're buying into them, about how we dress, about how we spend our time, what we go after, what we think is valuable. All this stuff is usually given to us by story. And why they're powerful is that they capture our mind and our attentions and our affections, and they get into our hearts and eventually get into our lives, that we make decisions, we sacrifice for them, and all of these other things. And oftentimes we're not even aware of the stories that we're caught up in. So we need to be careful. The stories about who we believe God to be and how we believe God relates to us and we relate to him. Stories we tell ourselves, and sometimes people have given us particular words, or they said stuff about us, and we begin to live that out, and we begin to project that onto the rest of our life, how we engage with others, what we choose to do, what we believe about ourselves. All that is a story. Stories about how we find happiness in this life, stories about how we find meaning in life. So what are these stories that you've been buying into that are forming you to become the person you are right now? And maybe what stories do we need to change in that? There's our environment, the cultural narrative you grew up in. There's Ben's cultural narrative, which for us in the winter, you can snowboard, you can ski. In the summer, you can be on a paddleboard on the river. There's hiking, there's rock climbing, there's tons of breweries to be at, all this different stuff. And if you're not careful, all of your extra time outside of work and family can be just filled up by all of this stuff that's good. And we need that stuff in our schedule. But if we're just filling our whole schedule with that, maybe that's leading us to not ever think about deeper questions, or helping us to devote time and energy to working out some stuff to become better people. And then there's our politics, which honestly functions as religion in our society and our world. And then there's your generation, like how you grew up believes a certain way. And sometimes there's good and there's bad with some of that. There's the digital algorithm, social media, what you're scrolling each and every day has a formative effect. Advertisements, even through social media, right? It has that formative effect. There's your ethnic and social economic groups that maybe because you live in a particular part of town, especially in Bend, that means you don't associate with people in the other part of town. And so just being careful about how this is shaping you and forming you to this point. There's your experience, your family of origin. Some of that's good, maybe some of that's bad, but just being careful about that. If you track your life, what are those pillars along the way that have formed you to becoming who you are today? What traumatic events are there that has really shaped how you engage with the world, how you react to people, how you view yourself, all of that stuff. What does your spiritual journey look like? What do you believe about God? How do you interact with God? Does your family of origin impact the way that you view God? And all of these different things. And ultimately you're asking this question, my experiences, how are they forming me? How are they shaping me? Who are they making me to become? If I continue that, who will I become? And remember, all this happens over time, which is a tricky thing because sometimes something can happen in a moment, in a traumatic event, and that affect the next 20 or 30 years as we're unwinding that. And so just remember that some of the stuff, this web of stuff from habits, relationships, stories, environment, time, and experience, making sure that we're just aware of those things. Some of it's active and some of it's passive, meaning some of it was done to us and some of it we do ourselves. And so just being aware of that, of saying, hey, I'm going to be intentional about my time, my days, who I'm becoming. And so I just need to be careful with that. And so just to lead you in a quick exercise, I just want you to close your eyes. I just want you to breathe. I want you to ask God to begin to direct your mind. I just want you to think about how you're spending your days and your week in this season of life. And I want you to track that time, track those habits, track those practices out 40 years. I want you to imagine if you continue to do all the things you're doing right now, who will you be in 40 years? And if you like that person, that's really good. You're on track. What things do you need to double down on right now? What things do you need to make sure are absolutely continue to stay in your life? And if that's not who you want to be, what things need to slowly start to change? And so with that, I have some discussion questions. We want to continue to take the conversation a bit deeper. And so whether you're watching podcast or YouTube channel, these questions will be there in the show description. But the questions for you are, number one, what habits do I keep in my daily or weekly life? How are they forming and shaping me? Number two, who are the most important people in your life and what do these relationships look like? Three, what stories have shaped the way you view the world and where did these stories originate? And then four, did God reveal anything new to you in this season, and what do you want to say more about that? So again, let's go through those discussion questions. Number one, what habits do I keep in my daily, weekly life, and how are they shaping you? Number two, who are the most important people in your life, and what do these relationships look like? Number three, what stories have shaped the way you view the world, and where do these stories originate? Number four, did God reveal anything new to you in this season that you want to go talk about with somebody? And so again, these things happen. These conversations happen best in communities. So go get a coffee with someone, chat about it, invite them into these conversations, and begin to grow more like Jesus together. Your practice for the week is a formation audit. And so again, this is through practicingtheway.org. You can go to their course. You can look at the videos that they've put out. You can download the handbook that's there, but we'll also have a link that's up in the description as well to help you to think through some of these questions this week. If you sit down at one time, it can take you about an hour. If you don't have that, spend 10 minutes a day going through one page at a time. And as always, make space to be with Jesus, become more like him, and then do the things that he would have you to do. Next week, we're going to talk about what does it look like to actually be intentional about our spiritual formation to make sure we all become the people that Jesus wants to become. So as always, if you want more information about our community, go to pinehillschurch.org. But I can't wait to see you in the next conversation. Have a great day. Bye.